The diamond on her left hand weighed more than her conscience. That was the thought that woke Mira at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, her eyes snapping open in the pitch-black master bedroom of a penthouse that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The stone was 4 carats, flawless, the kind of rock that made other women gasp when she reached for a glass of champagne at charity galas. But at this hour, in the suffocating silence of a marriage that had curdled into captivity, that diamond felt like a shackle bolted to her finger. Beside her, Vikram slept like the dead. His breathing was deep, rhythmic, and utterly indifferent to the fact that his wife lay awake counting the cracks in the ceiling she couldn't even see. He was a handsome man, still was at 43, with a jaw that could cut glass and hair that silvered at the temples in a way that made younger women swoon. He was also a monster. But monsters, Mira had learned, wore bespoke suits and donated to children's hospitals and never, ever left a bruise where anyone could see it. The first time he hit her, she had convinced herself it was an accident. They had been married for 2 years, and she had accidentally knocked over his single malt scotch, a 30-year-old Macallan, because Vikram didn't drink anything that cost less than a used car. The glass shattered on the marble floor, amber liquid pooling like blood, and before she could even reach for paper towels, his hand had connected with her cheek. Not a slap. A backhand. The kind of hit men used in movies to shut women up. "I'm so sorry," she had whispered, holding her stinging face. "I'll clean it up." "I'm so sorry." He had looked at her with something that wasn't quite remorse. It was more like impatience, as if she had inconvenienced him by forcing him to discipline her. "Don't be clumsy," he had said, and walked away to pour himself another glass. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of carefully positioned elbows, of flinching when he raised his hand to reach for the salt, of learning to read the micro-expressions that preceded the storm. A tightening of the jaw, a flare of the nostrils, a sudden, terrible stillness that fell over him like a shroud. Mira had become an expert in fear. She could smell it on herself now, a sour undertone beneath the Chanel No. 5. She could taste it in the back of her throat every morning when she woke up and realized she was still here, still breathing, still married to a man who held her life in his hands like a chess piece. But it wasn't just fear that kept her. It was the money. Vikram's net worth was somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million. He was a real estate developer, the kind of man who bought buildings the way other people bought groceries. And when they had married, he had made her sign a prenuptial agreement so ironclad that even the most aggressive divorce lawyer in Mumbai had told her, unless he beats you within an inch of your life and you have video evidence of him confessing to a crime, you get nothing. Not the penthouse. Not the car. Not a single rupee of alimony. She had signed it like a fool. She had been 24, fresh out of a journalism degree, dazzled by the private jets and the 5-star hotels and the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. She had believed in fairy tales. She had believed that love conquered all. Love did not conquer all. Love did not conquer the bank accounts that were entirely in his name, the property deeds that bore his signature alone, the offshore accounts she only knew about because she had accidentally seen a statement on his desk one night. Love did not conquer the fact that she had no savings of her own, no career to fall back on, no family who could take her in. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, and her only brother lived in Australia and hadn't spoken to her since she married Vikram because he couldn't stand the pretentious bastard. So Mira stayed. She stayed through the slaps and the shoves and the times he grabbed her by the hair and dragged her across the bedroom floor because dinner was 5 minutes late. She stayed through the humiliation of making excuses to her friends. "I walked into a door. I fell down the stairs. I'm just so clumsy, haha." She stayed because the alternative was the street. The alternative was nothing. But something was shifting inside her. A slow, tectonic grind that had started the night he had thrown her phone against the wall and shattered it into 1,000 pieces because she had dared to text a male colleague from her brief, failed attempt at freelance writing. She had watched the fragments scatter across the hardwood floor, and something in her chest had cracked open too. Not her heart. Something deeper. Something that had been sleeping for 7 long years and was finally waking up. She had stopped crying after that night. She had stopped apologizing. She had started planning. The breaking point came on a Sunday. Not a particularly eventful Sunday. It wasn't the anniversary of anything, wasn't a holiday, wasn't even a day when Vikram was in a particularly bad mood. He had been in a decent mood, actually. A deal had closed, and he had come home with a bottle of vintage champagne and a smile that almost looked genuine. "Pour me a glass," he had said, loosening his tie and collapsing onto the leather sofa in the living room. "We're celebrating." Mira had poured the champagne. She had handed him the flute with steady hands, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She had learned to perform calm like a circus act. She could smile while her inside screamed. He had taken the glass, sipped it, and then looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't desire. It was something colder. Evaluation. Like she was a piece of property he was considering selling. "You've been quiet lately," he had said. "What's going on in that pretty little head of yours?" "Nothing," she had said, which was the safest answer. "Just tired." He had laughed, a short, hollow sound. "Tired? That's all you ever say. Tired. You're a housewife, Mira. You don't have a job. You don't have any responsibilities. What exactly are you tired from? Shopping? Getting your nails done?" She had bitten her tongue. She had been biting her tongue for 7 years. It was practically calloused at this point. "I'm just tired," she had repeated. "It's nothing." He had stood up abruptly, the champagne sloshing over the rim of his glass. "It's nothing. Everything is nothing with you. Do you have any idea how boring that is? How exhausting it is to be married to a woman who has nothing to say?" She had opened her mouth to respond. She didn't even know what she was going to say. Maybe an apology, maybe a deflection, maybe just a sound to fill the awful silence, and that was when he had struck her. It wasn't a slap. It was a punch. A closed fist, right into her ribcage, the kind of hit that stole your breath and left you gasping on the floor like a fish thrown onto a dock. She had crumpled. The champagne flute had fallen from her hand and shattered, and she had landed in the shards of glass, feeling them dig into her palms, but that pain was nothing compared to the fire in her ribs. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't see. She couldn't think. "Get up," he had said, standing over her. "Get up and clean this mess. You're pathetic." And something in her had just snapped. Not with anger. Not with tears. With clarity. A sudden, piercing clarity that cut through the fog of 7 years of abuse like a knife through butter. She had looked up at him, her palms bleeding onto the white marble floor, her ribs screaming, and she had seen him for what he truly was. A small man. A weak man. A man who had to beat his wife to feel powerful because he knew, deep down, that he was nothing without his money. Without the buildings he bought, and the people he crushed, and the empire he had built on the backs of others. She had gotten up. She had walked to the kitchen, her legs shaking, her ribs on fire, and she had run her hands under cold water, watching the blood swirl down the drain. She had wrapped her palms in paper towels. She had walked back into the living room, and she had looked him in the eye. "I want a divorce," she had said. The words hung in the air between them, electric and dangerous. Vikram had stared at her, his mouth slightly open, and then he had laughed. A real laugh, the kind that crinkled his eyes and showed his teeth. "You're hilarious," he had said. "You know you're hilarious? You leave me, you get nothing. You live on the street. You starve. You." "I don't care," she had said, and she meant it. She meant it with every fiber of her being. "I don't care if I'm homeless. I don't care if I'm hungry. I would rather die on the street than spend one more day in this house with you." The words had hit him like a physical blow. She had seen something flicker in his eyes. Fear? No. Vikram didn't feel fear. It was more like confusion, the bewilderment of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. "You're not going anywhere," he had said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're not leaving this penthouse. You're not leaving me. You think you can survive without me? You can't even boil an egg. You can't hold down a job. You're nothing without me, Mira. Nothing." She had looked at him, and for the first time in 7 years, she hadn't flinched. "We'll see," she had said, and she had walked out the door. She didn't take anything with her. No clothes. No jewelry. No phone. He had smashed hers, remember? No wallet. No keys. She walked out of that penthouse in the silk pajamas she had been wearing, with her bleeding palms wrapped in paper towels and her bare feet on the cold marble floor of the hallway, and she didn't look back. The elevator ride down took 47 seconds. She counted each one. 47 seconds of freedom, even if she didn't know what freedom looked like. 47 seconds of the life she had been too afraid to choose. When the doors opened into the lobby, the doorman, a sweet old man named Mr. Patel who had worked in the building for 20 years, looked at her with concern. "Madam, are you all right? Your hands." "I'm fine," she had said, her voice steady even though her entire body was trembling. "I'm just going for a walk." A walk. At 11:30 p.m. on a Sunday night, in silk pajamas, with her hands bleeding and no shoes on. Mr. Patel knew something was wrong. She could see it in his eyes. But he was too polite, too afraid of losing his job, to ask the questions that were burning on his tongue. "Be careful," he had said, and she had nodded and walked out into the humid Mumbai night. The streets of South Mumbai are never truly empty. Even at midnight, there are people, street vendors packing up their carts, taxi drivers waiting for fares, stray dogs nosing through garbage piles. She had walked past them all, a ghost in silk, her feet growing more and more painful as the rough pavement tore at her soles. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have anything. And yet, for the first time in 7 years, she felt light. The weight of Vikram's money, of his expectations, of his fists, it had all lifted off her shoulders the moment she walked out that door. She walked for 2 hours. She walked until her feet were raw and bleeding, until her ribs ached with every breath, until her hands had stopped bleeding but had started throbbing with a deep, bone-level pain. She walked until she found herself in a neighborhood she didn't recognize, a poorer neighborhood, with crumbling buildings and open sewers and the smell of frying oil and incense. She sat down on the steps of a temple, her back against a cold stone, and she cried. Not the silent tears she had cried in her marriage. Ugly, racking sobs that tore out of her throat and shook her entire body. She cried for the girl she had been, bright, ambitious, full of dreams. She cried for the woman she had become, broken, empty, a shell of herself. She cried because she was afraid, because she was alone, because she had no idea what she was going to do next. And then, when the tears were spent, she got up and kept walking. She found a public fountain and drank from the spigot, the water cold and metallic against her parched throat. She found a pile of discarded newspapers and wrapped her feet in them, the rough paper offering a thin barrier against the pavement. She found a cardboard box in an alley and curled up inside it, and for the first time in 7 years, she slept without dreaming of him. The next morning, she woke to the sound of a broom sweeping past her box. A woman, perhaps 50, with a kind face and calloused hands, was cleaning the alley. When she saw Mira stir, she didn't recoil in fear or disgust. She just tilted her head and said in Hindi, "Are you hungry, Beta?" And Mira, who hadn't eaten in 18 hours, nodded. The woman's name was Asha. She worked as a maid for a wealthy family in the neighborhood, but she was also, as Mira would soon learn, a bit of a miracle worker. She gave Mira a cup of chai and a piece of stale bread, and she listened to her story, all of it. The abuse, the money, the escape, the nothing. "Beta," Asha said, shaking her head, "you have been blessed and cursed in equal measure. That man took everything from you, but he could not take your spirit. That is still here. That is still strong." "But I have nothing," Mira said, her voice cracking. "No money, no home, no job. I don't even have a phone." "Nothing is a powerful starting point," Asha said. "When you have nothing, you have nothing to lose. That is when you are truly free." Those words stayed with Mira. She spent the next week sleeping in the temple, washing herself in the public fountain, eating whatever scraps Asha could give her. She looked like a ghost, thin, dirty, her silk pajamas now stained and torn. But she was alive, and she was free.
On the 8th day, something happened.
She was sitting on the temple steps, watching the morning crowd of devotees, when she noticed a man struggling with his phone. He was an older man, perhaps 70, with a white beard and thick glasses, and he was trying to take a photo, but couldn't figure out how to focus the camera. "Excuse me," Mira said, her voice rusty from disuse. "Can I help?" The man looked at her, really looked at her, and his face softened. He wasn't looking at her torn clothes or her dirty hair. He was looking at her eyes. And something in her eyes must have convinced him, because he handed her the phone. She took the photo for him. She also, in a moment of instinct, showed him how to adjust the brightness, how to switch to video mode, how to delete the accidental screenshots he kept taking. The man was amazed. "You know phones well," he said. "Are you a student? A teacher?" "I used to be a journalist," Mira said, surprising herself. She hadn't said those words in years. A long time ago. The man looked at her thoughtfully. "My name is Dr. Ramesh Nair," he said. "I am the director of a community center in Dharavi. We teach digital skills to underprivileged children. Would you like to help us? I cannot pay you much, 100 rupees a day maybe, but it is honest work." 100 rupees a day. Roughly $1.20. Less than the cost of Vikram's morning coffee. "I would be honored," Mira said. That was the beginning. Mira spent the next 6 months working at the community center, teaching children how to type, how to use spreadsheets, how to navigate the internet. She slept on a cot in the back room of the center. She ate the meals the children's mothers sent for their kids. She saved every rupee she could, not because she had a plan, but because she didn't know what else to do. And then, one evening, a volunteer at the center, a young man named Arjun who taught coding, asked her a question that changed everything. "You type really fast," he said, watching her respond to emails for the center. "Have you ever thought about freelance writing? There are platforms online where people pay for articles, copywriting, that sort of thing."
Mira had thought about it.
She had thought about it every single night, lying on her cot, staring at the ceiling. But she had no computer, no phone, no way to even access the internet except for the center's ancient desktop computer, which was usually occupied by the kids. Arjun saw the look on her face and smiled. "I have an old laptop at home," he said. "It's slow, but it works. You can have it. Consider it a donation to the cause." She didn't cry. She had used up all her tears. But her hands trembled as she took the laptop from him, her fingers tracing the worn keyboard as if it were made of gold. That night, she signed up for a freelance platform. She had no portfolio, no samples, nothing to show potential clients except her own belief in her ability. She bid on jobs that paid $5, $10, $20. She wrote articles about gardening and finance and travel and parenting, topics she knew nothing about, but she researched them ferociously, staying up until 3 a.m. every night, drinking chai and squinting at the glowing screen. It was hard. It was grueling. There were nights when she submitted proposals to 50 clients and got not a single reply. There were days when she went hungry because she spent her last rupees on a mobile hotspot to submit a deadline. There were moments when she sat in the cramped back room of the community center, her head in her hands, and she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. But she didn't give up, because giving up would mean going back to Vikram, going back to the penthouse and the beatings and the silence. And she would rather die in that back room than go back. The breakthrough came 8 months after her escape. She had been working on a ghostwriting project, a memoir for a tech entrepreneur who was too busy to write it himself. The pay was abysmal, $30 for 10,000 words, but she poured her soul into it. She wrote about his childhood, his struggles, his triumphs. She made his story sing. And when she sent him the final draft, he wrote back with one line. "This is incredible. Do you do other types of writing? I need someone to write website copy for a new startup I'm launching." That startup was a platform for freelance writers. It was a piece of software that helped independent journalists and content creators manage their clients, their invoices, and their deadlines. And Mira wrote every word of the website, the homepage, the landing pages, the blog posts, the FAQ section. She wrote it for a pittance, but she wrote it with passion. When the startup launched, it was a modest success. But more importantly, the founder told his friends. And his friends told their friends. And within 6 months, Mira had more clients than she could handle. She was making $300 a month, then $500, then $1,000. It wasn't millions. It wasn't even thousands. But it was enough. Enough to rent a tiny room in a shared apartment. Enough to buy a decent laptop. Enough to eat 3 meals a day. She started a blog about escaping domestic violence, about rebuilding your life from nothing. She wrote anonymously at first, using a pseudonym, afraid that Vikram would find her. But her words resonated with people. Women reached out to her, sharing their own stories. Men reached out too, asking how they could help the women in their lives. One day, a publisher reached out. They wanted to turn her blog into a book. They offered her an advance of $50,000. $50,000. Mira stared at the email for 3 hours. She read it over and over again, waiting for it to disappear, for it to be some cruel joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was real. She signed the contract. She wrote the book in 3 months, pouring every ounce of her pain and her triumph onto the page. She called it The Price of Silence. It was a title that came to her in a dream, and she knew, in her bones, that it was exactly right. The book was published a year after she had walked out of that penthouse. It didn't become a bestseller overnight, but it had legs, slow, steady legs that carried it onto bestseller lists, onto morning talk shows, onto the bedside tables of women all over the country. Mira became a symbol, a survivor, a woman who had been beaten and broken and had crawled out of the rubble anyway. She did interviews. She spoke at conferences. She started a foundation for domestic violence survivors. She was happy, genuinely, profoundly, unshakably happy. And Vikram? His empire had been crumbling for a while. The cracks had started showing about the same time Mira had left, though he would never admit it. He made bad deals, desperate deals, the kind of deals you make when you have something to prove. He invested in projects that failed. He borrowed money from people who didn't forgive. But the real blow came when his partner, a man named Sanjay with whom he had been cheating on his taxes for years, turned on him. The documents were all there in black and white. The offshore accounts, the falsified balance sheets, the bribes to government officials. Sanjay had made a deal with the authorities. In exchange for immunity, he handed over everything. And when the investigators came for Vikram, they found enough evidence to put him away for 2 decades. He went to prison. Mira read about it in the newspaper, a small article on page 5, the kind of article that doesn't make a splash but still manages to catch your eye. Real estate mogul arrested for fraud. It mentioned his name, his holdings, his penthouse that had been seized by the government. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not pity. Nothing. Just a distant, detached acknowledgement that the man who had once controlled her every breath was now controlling nothing but the oxygen in a 6x8 cell. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. Mira was in her new apartment, a modest but beautiful 2-bedroom in Bandra, with a balcony that overlooked the Arabian Sea and walls she had painted herself in a soft, calming shade of sage green. She had bought it with her book royalties, paid in full, no mortgage, no strings attached. It was hers. Every square inch of it was hers. She was curled up on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea and a manuscript she was editing for a fellow survivor's memoir. The work was fulfilling in a way her old life had never been. She was helping people. She was making a difference. She was finally, after all these years, exactly where she was supposed to be. The unknown number flashing on her phone screen was from a prison. She knew that because she had seen that prefix before. She had done a series of workshops with incarcerated women, teaching them writing skills as a form of therapy. The number was unfamiliar, but the prefix was unmistakable. She almost didn't answer. It was late, she was tired, and she had learned the hard way that not every call needed to be picked up. But something, call it intuition, call it fate, call it the universe playing one final, cruel joke, made her swipe the screen and press the phone to her ear. Hello. There was a pause. A long, crackling pause, filled with the static of a prison phone line. And then a voice she hadn't heard in 4 years. Mira. Her blood turned to ice. Every hair on her arms stood on end. Her heart, which had been beating a calm, steady rhythm, suddenly crashed against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. She knew that voice. She had spent 7 years dreading that voice. She had spent 4 years convincing herself she would never hear it again. "Vikram," she said, and her voice was remarkably steady.
Composed.
The voice of a woman who had survived the worst and come out the other side. "How did you get this number?" "I have my ways," he said, and she could hear the ghost of his old arrogance in his tone, a man who still believed he could bend the world to his will. "You've done well for yourself, Mira. I've been following your career. The book, the foundation, the interviews. You're quite the celebrity now." She said nothing. She had learned, in the years since she left him, that silence was a weapon. It made people uncomfortable. It made them fill the void with their own desperation. "I need your help," he said, and there it was, the crack in his armor. The first hint of desperation. "I need you to post bail. I need you to hire me a lawyer. A good one, not the public defender they assign me. I need—" "Vikram," she interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "You need a lot of things, but I don't give them to you anymore. I don't give you anything." "Mira, listen to me."
"No," she said.
"You listened to me. You beat me. You broke my ribs. You controlled every aspect of my life for 7 years. You made me sign a prenuptial agreement that left me with nothing. When I walked out of that penthouse, I had no money, no phone, no shoes on my feet. I slept in a cardboard box. I drank from a public fountain. I starved." "I know," he said, and his voice was different now, softer, almost pleading. "I know what I did. I was a monster. I was cruel. You were," she agreed. "And now you're in prison. And I'm in my apartment overlooking the sea. And I have a life that I built with my own 2 hands, without your money, without your name, without your permission. Why would I help you?" "Because you loved me once," he said. And that was when Mira laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had been released from a long, terrible imprisonment and could finally see the absurdity of the situation. The sheer, cosmic injustice of it all. "I loved a ghost," she said. "I loved the man I thought you were. That man never existed. You were a performance, Vikram. A performance of strength and success that was really just weakness and fear. And I don't owe that man anything. I don't owe you anything." "Please," he said, and now she heard it, the first crack of genuine desperation. "Please, Mira. I have nobody else. My family won't speak to me. My friends are all gone. Sanjay turned on me. I'm alone. I'm alone, and I'm scared, and I don't know what to do." She closed her eyes. She thought about the nights she had lain awake, terrified of the sound of his footsteps. She thought about the bruises she had hidden under long sleeves. She thought about the day she had walked out the door with nothing but her bleeding hands and her crumbling hope. And then she thought about the woman she had become. The woman who had rebuilt her life from the ashes. The woman who had spoken on stages, who had held the hands of other survivors, who had told them, over and over and over again, that they were strong enough to leave. "I can't help you," she said. "Not because I'm cruel. Not because I hate you, I don't actually. I used to. But I don't have the energy for hate anymore. I can't help you because I've spent the last 4 years learning to love myself, and the first thing that love taught me was that I don't have to save the people who destroyed me." "Mira. Goodbye, Vikram." She hung up. She sat there in the silence of her apartment, the phone still warm in her hand, the tea growing cold on the coffee table. She expected to feel something, satisfaction, maybe, or grief, or even the faint stirring of old guilt. But all she felt was peace. She had drawn her line. She had protected herself. And for the first time in her life, she hadn't needed anyone's permission to do it. But the universe wasn't done with her yet. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was thick, official, stamped with the seal of the prison. She almost threw it away unopened. She had already said her piece. She didn't need to hear any more. But curiosity, that old, stubborn friend, got the better of her. She opened the envelope and found a letter written in Vikram's handwriting. His script was smaller than she remembered, more cramped. The handwriting of a man who had lost his bravado. Mira, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know you have every right to never speak to me again. But I'm writing to you anyway, because I have nowhere else to turn, and because some small part of me still believes, foolishly, desperately, that the woman I married still exists somewhere inside the woman you've become. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that. I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I will never forget it. I lie awake every night in this cell, replaying every moment, every punch, every slap, every scream that I silenced. I see your face, not the face of the successful woman you are now, but the face of the woman I broke. And I hate myself for it. But I am asking you for mercy. Not for me, for my mother. She's sick, Mira. Really sick. Cancer. Stage 4. She's in a hospital in Delhi, and she doesn't have much time left. She wants to see me one last time, and the prison won't grant me compassionate release unless I have a legal advocate. A lawyer. The kind that costs money I don't have. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to help me say goodbye to my mother. That's all. One visit. One final moment. And then I'll go back to my cell, and I'll serve my time, and I'll never bother you again. I'm begging you, Mira. I know you have no reason to help me, but please, please help my mother. She's innocent in all of this. She doesn't deserve to die without seeing her son one last time. Yours, Vikram. Mira read the letter 3 times. She read it until the words blurred together, until she could see Vikram's face behind every carefully formed letter. And then she did something that surprised even herself. She called her lawyer. Her lawyer's name was Priya Sharma. She was a fierce, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had helped Mira negotiate her book contract, set up her foundation, and navigate the tricky waters of her newfound fame. She was also, as it happened, an expert in prison law. Mira, Priya said, her voice crisp over the phone. I got your message. You want me to look into Vikram's case. I want you to verify something for me, Mira said. He wrote me a letter saying his mother is dying of cancer. I need to know if that's true. And if it is? Mira hesitated. She had been asking herself that question ever since she read the letter. If it was true, if Vikram's mother really was dying, did that change anything? Did it change the fact that he had beaten her? Did it change the fact that he had stolen years of her life?
No.
It didn't change any of that. But it did change the equation. Because Vikram's mother, a woman named Kamala who had once been kind to Mira, who had always treated her with a gentleness that was conspicuously absent from her son, was innocent. She was an old woman facing the end of her life, and she deserved to see her son. Just find out the truth, Mira said. That's all I'm asking. Find out if she's sick. And if she is. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Priya called back 3 days later. His mother is sick, she said, and Mira's stomach dropped. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give her maybe 2 months. Maybe less. Mira was quiet for a long moment. She stared out the window at the Arabian Sea, the water glittering in the afternoon sun. She thought about Kamala's gentle eyes, her soft hands, the way she had always made Mira feel welcome in a family that was otherwise cold and forbidding. What do you want to do?
Priya asked.
I don't know, Mira admitted. I honestly don't know. A month later, Mira walked into a prison in central India. She had flown in from Mumbai, taken a taxi through dusty, forgotten roads, and passed through 3 layers of security to get to this moment. She was wearing a simple white kurta, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked nothing like the glamorous author who graced magazine covers. And she was here to see the man who had broken her. Visiting hours were crowded, the visiting room filled with the low hum of conversations and the occasional bark of a guard. Mira sat at a metal table, her hands folded in front of her, and watched as Vikram was let in. He looked terrible. He had always been a handsome man, well-dressed, well-groomed, the kind of man who walked into a room and commanded it. But prison had stripped that away from him. His hair was thin and graying. His face was gaunt, hollowed out by what she could only assume was a combination of poor food and endless regret. He was wearing the standard prison uniform, orange and shapeless, and he looked diminished in a way that was almost heartbreaking. He sat down across from her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't think you would come." "I didn't think I would either," she admitted. "I got your letter," she continued. "The one about your mother. I had my lawyer verify it. It's true." He nodded, a small, jerky motion. "She's getting weaker. The doctors said she might not make it to the end of the month. I don't have much time, Mira. I need to see her. I need to tell her I'm sorry for all of this. For everything." "Your mother didn't do anything wrong," Mira said. "She was always kind to me. She didn't deserve to have a son who—" She stopped. She didn't want to say the words. They felt like poison on her tongue. "I know," Vikram said. "I know she didn't deserve it. I know you didn't deserve it. I know I failed everyone. I failed you. I failed her. I failed myself. I look in the mirror every day and I see a monster, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make it right." "You can't make it right," Mira said. "You can't undo what you did. You can't give me back the years I lost. You can't heal the bruises that are still on my soul. You can't fix it. That's the thing about breaking someone, Vikram. There are some things you can't put back together." He was crying now, silent tears sliding down his gaunt cheeks, disappearing into the collar of his uniform. She had never seen him cry before. In 7 years of marriage, he had always been the one in control, the one who made her cry. Seeing him like this was disorienting, almost surreal. "I know," he whispered. "I know I can't fix it. But I can try to be better. I can try to be a different person."
That's what I want, Mira.
"I want to be better. I want to die having done at least one good thing in my life." "Then die," she said, and her voice was hard. "Having done one good thing. Don't ask me to help you. Don't ask me to save you. Save yourself. That's the only way this works." He stared at her, his eyes red and swollen. And then, slowly, painfully, he nodded. "You're different," he said. "The woman I married, she would have done anything I asked. She would have written a check without a second thought. She would have begged me to let her help me. But you—" "She died," Mira said. "She died the night you punched me in the ribs, and I walked out the door. I'm someone else now. Someone stronger. Someone who doesn't need your approval. Someone who doesn't need you at all." He flinched, but he didn't argue. He just sat there, a broken man in a broken uniform, and let her words wash over him. "Goodbye, Vikram," she said, and she stood up. "I hope you find the peace you're looking for, but you have to find it on your own. I can't help you. I won't help you. And I'm done carrying the weight of what you did to me." She turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't let herself hear if he called her name. She walked through the prison gates, out into the blazing Indian sun, and she felt the weight of the past 4 years, the past 11 years, the past 35 years of her life, finally lift off her shoulders. She was free. She never saw Vikram again. A month after her visit to the prison, his mother passed away. Mira read about it in an obituary, a small, dignified notice that mentioned Kamala's love of gardening and her devotion to her family. It didn't mention Vikram, not by name, just her son. It was a small mercy, one that Kamala had probably insisted upon herself. A few months after that, Mira received a letter from the prison. It was from Vikram, but it wasn't a plea. It wasn't a request for money or help. It was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, with just a few lines. "Mira, my mother is gone. I couldn't see her before she died because I didn't have a lawyer and I didn't have your help. And honestly, I don't blame you for that. You were right. I had to save myself. And I didn't. I couldn't. Because I had spent so many years being cruel that I didn't know how to be kind to myself. But I want you to know that what you said about saving myself, about being a different person, I haven't forgotten it. I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying to be the person I should have been all along. I'm taking classes. I'm reading books. I'm writing letters to my mother, letters she'll never read, telling her I'm sorry for all the pain I caused. I know it's too little, too late. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to do better. And I want you to know that you were the reason I started. You were the one who showed me that people can change. You changed. You went from a woman who is broken and bruised to a woman who is strong and successful and respected. And that gives me hope that maybe someday I can change too. Thank you for that. For everything. I won't bother you again. Goodbye, Mira. Vikram. Mira read the letter 3 times. And then she folded it and put it in a drawer with the other pieces of her past. The wedding photos she had burned, the diamond ring she had sold for $100, the memories she had spent years trying to forget. She never wrote back. She never called. She never visited him again. But she thought about him sometimes late at night, when the city was quiet and the sea was dark and the only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. She thought about the man he had been and the man he was becoming. She thought about the years she had wasted and the years she had left. And she decided in the end that she didn't need to forgive him. She didn't need to hate him either. She just needed to live her life, her beautiful, complicated, hard-won life, and let him live his. A year after Vikram's letter, Mira stood on the balcony of her apartment in Bandra and watched the sun rise over the Arabian Sea. It was a new year, a new chapter. She had just signed a deal for a second book, a follow-up to The Price of Silence that focused on rebuilding, on finding joy after trauma, on learning to trust again. The advance was bigger this time. The expectations were higher. And for the first time in her life, she felt ready for them. Her foundation was thriving. She had opened 3 new shelters for domestic violence survivors, and she was in talks to expand internationally. She had given a TED Talk that had been viewed millions of times. She had been invited to speak at the United Nations. And she had fallen in love. It had happened slowly, quietly, without any of the fireworks that she had once associated with romance. His name was Dev. He was a graphic designer she had met through her foundation's events. He was kind, patient, and funny, and he had made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't interested in her fame or her money. He was interested in her. The real her. The woman who woke up with bedhead and drank too much coffee and sometimes still had nightmares about a man she had left behind. He was everything Vikram had never been. He was gentle. He was respectful. And he looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, not because of what she wore or how she did her hair, but because of who she was. She wasn't sure yet if she would marry again. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of commitment. But she was ready to be happy. And that, she had learned, was enough. 6 months after that sunrise, Mira received a letter from the prison. It wasn't from Vikram. It was from the prison warden, informing her that Vikram had been granted parole for good behavior. He was scheduled to be released in 2 weeks. He had asked through official channels if she would be willing to meet him, not to ask for anything, just to talk, just to see each other one last time. Mira read the letter and felt nothing. No fear. No anger. No lingering regret. Just the calm, quiet knowledge that she had already said everything she needed to say. She had already given him her answer. She wrote back, through her lawyer. I decline the meeting. I wish him well, with his new life. But I am not part of his story anymore. He is not part of mine. I hope he finds the peace he's looking for, but he won't find it with me. She sent the letter and didn't think about it again. 2 weeks later, she heard through mutual acquaintances that Vikram was released. He had moved to a small town in the mountains, far from the glittering cities he had once ruled. He was working at a small bookstore, living a quiet, unassuming life. He was, by all accounts, a changed man. Mira didn't reach out to him. She didn't want to. She had closed that chapter of her life, and she had no desire to reopen it. Instead, she lived her life. She wrote her books. She expanded her foundation. She traveled the world, speaking to survivors, hearing their stories, giving them the hope that she had once been given by a kind woman named Asha. She grew older. She grew wiser. She grew happy. Years passed. Mira's foundation became one of the most respected organizations in the country, providing not just shelter but education, job training, and psychological support to thousands of women. Her books were translated into dozens of languages. She became a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the fact that no matter how broken you are, you can rebuild. She married Dev, quietly, on a beach in Goa, with only a handful of close friends in attendance. She wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair, and she cried happy tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a modest band, nothing like the diamond that had once weighed her down. They had 2 children, twins, a boy and a girl. She named them Asha and Kamal, after the woman who had saved her on the streets and the mother-in-law who had shown her kindness when she had none. The cycles of abuse, she thought, often continued from one generation to the next. But she was determined to break that cycle. She raised her children with love, with patience, with the kind of gentle discipline that came from understanding, not fear. She taught them that they were worthy of respect, that their bodies were their own, and that they never, ever had to stay in a situation that made them feel unsafe. She didn't tell them about Vikram until they were teenagers, old enough to understand, old enough to process, old enough to forgive. She told them the whole story from the beginning to the end. She told them about the abuse and the escape, the struggle and the triumph, the call and the letter, and the meeting she had declined. Her daughter, Asha, had looked at her with wide eyes and asked, "Do you hate him, Mom?" And Mira had looked at her beautiful, brilliant daughter and said, "No, I don't hate him. Hate is too heavy a burden to carry, and I've spent my whole life learning to lay down my burdens. But I don't love him either. I just let him go. I let him go so I could be here. With you. With your brother. With your father. With this life that I built with my own 2 hands." Her son, Kamal, had nodded slowly. "That's really brave, Mom." "No," she had said, smiling through the tears that had sprung to her eyes. "It's not brave. It's just what we do. We survive. And then we thrive. And then we help others do the same." Mira lived a long, full life. She died at 82, surrounded by her family, Dev, her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. She died in her sleep, peacefully, after a day spent laughing and eating and watching the sunset over the Arabian Sea. At her funeral, her daughter read a letter she had written just before she died, a letter that was intended for everyone who had ever felt broken. "Dear anyone who is reading this, I spent the first half of my life being told I was nothing. I spent the second half proving that was a lie. You are not nothing. You are not broken. You are not unworthy. You are not anything that anyone else has told you you are. You are a miracle. You are a survivor. You are a warrior. You are the woman who walked out of a penthouse with nothing but her pain and her hope and built a life that inspired millions. I did it. And so can you. So get up. Walk out the door. Leave behind the people who don't deserve you. Find the people who do. And live. Live like the world is yours because it is. It's yours for the taking. Love. Mira." The applause at her funeral was not the sad, solemn sound of grief. It was the joyful, defiant sound of celebration. The sound of a life well lived. The sound of a woman who had been beaten and broken and had risen, phoenix-like, from the ashes of her own despair. And far away, in a small mountain town, a man with graying hair and kind eyes, a man who had once been a monster, but had spent the last decades of his life trying to become something else, read about her death in the newspaper.
He wept.
And then he closed the newspaper, walked outside, and looked up at the sky. "Goodbye," he whispered to the clouds. "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry for everything. And thank you for teaching me, even when I didn't want to learn, that we can all change. We can all be better. We can all, in the end, find peace." He walked back into his bookstore, and he spent the rest of the day selling books, being kind to strangers and trying, as always, to be the person Mira had always known he could be.